I'm gonna out you as an atheist. I think this is public knowledge, but it's an atheist who writes an article called "What Good is Religious Freedom?" Right, and then the subtitle is like so that's John Locke, Ayn Rand, and the non-religious case for respecting it. And I think somebody who doesn't know anything about any of us or you or might think that's an interesting, like, why would an atheist care? I took away religious freedom is valuable because it's a form of intellectual freedom.
That is basically it. It's not about religion.
Yeah, it's not really about religion.
It's not about religion.
But
religion
it's still a defense
is an expression. Well, my point, no. The First Amendment, even when it refers to religious freedom, in a sense, it's not about religion. That's just a prominent form in its time, an issue that the people then were very concerned with, and we can come back to that in terms of the historical context, right? But religious freedom is, again, a form of intellectual freedom. And we all need intellectual freedom so that we can use our minds rationally to learn, to develop better and better lives for ourselves. So yes, even even Ayn Rand or the atheist should care about religious freedom, because if you start, oh no, you can't have religious freedom, why not? Well, because you're not supposed to think that. Well, wait a second, that sounds like Mill, who we were just talking about. That sounds like, oh, that's not good for somebody else or in some other way. It's not your right to tell me what to think. Mm-hmm. I may have some really stupid thoughts. I may have some really self-destructive thoughts, self-destructive in the sense of I'm wasting all my time on this completely irrational religion and devoting a lot of my life and organizing my life around it, but it's my life, my mistake to make, right? Freedom of the mind is what we need to figure out what's wrong with religion, but to figure out what's right and what's true in all spheres. So I'm glad you point to that essay, though, because, well, two reasons. One is, I think that's a good essay. You have your own evaluations of your work and your better work. That's a good. I can tell you the ones that I think
it's worth the price
of
admission.
No, but that one's good. It goes into real depth too, more than I had in some previous things I had written about sort of some of the. I don't want to scare people off now, but some of the mechanics of thinking and thinking rationally that really, I think, bring out the necessity of freedom for you to be able to think rationally.
You have. So, you have a.
And so one more thing there. Part of what I want to be saying too is, in this country, because so many people continue to be religious and identify strongly with their religion and their religious heritage, their parents and their grandparents, and they're going back, and they know religious freedom was a big deal at the time of the founding. They seem to have absorbed the idea that there's something special about religion that privileges it or that gives it this special status. It has no special status, religion per se, right? It's no more than journalists have or should have special status, right? Freedom of the press, right? But that's not because there's some special elevated value in being a journalist. No, these are just forms that are commonly contested forms of using your intellectual freedom, which is what the amendment overall is about. So these days, when we have these debates about religious freedom, some people will mistakenly point to how religious the founders were, or they're seeing certain value in religion as the reason why we should have this special privileges. And I think one thing that the First Amendment puts very well in that opening clause that you read, right? I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but they say it's a two-parter when it comes to freedom of religion. No establishment will respect free exercise, right? It's a two-part. Well, why don't you read it to us again? The first.
So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment
of religion. Go ahead.
Or prohibiting the free
exercise thereof.
And that's the first clause, I think, right?
Yeah, but that's all. I just wanted right. So just the religion thing. That should follow through for everything. Like that understanding was so right and so important in terms of the government saying, we're not going to help any religion. We're not going to establish any religion by giving any special subsidies or supports to any religion. But nor are we going to get in your way, right? We're going to respect the complete free exercise. It should have that same attitude, for instance, with the press, which increasingly it doesn't. PBS, government subsidies, right? NPR, government subsidies. And those are just like the two most conspicuous examples. But when the government subsidizes certain ideas, as it does in a lot of the science foundations that we have, the NIH, right? Or various others, right? When the government is subsidizing, that's like an establishment of religion. It's establishing, even when it's just giving a leg up. Oh, we're not going to outlaw these other religions, or we're not going to outlaw these other scientists, but we're going to give grants to the guys who study this or say that, right? No. Same with newspapers or media. We'll have this kind of public media. It's like, no, don't establish any. Don't do anything toward establishment, and don't do anything to interfere with the free exercise. Don't establish public schools. It's like, at any rate. So I just wanted to come back to that. When speaking about religion within the First Amendment, they did a really nice job of, I think, characterizing the proper governmental attitude. And what we all need to understand is that attitude is equally appropriate to other kinds of speech where people don't see any problem with subsidizing this or restricting that.
Well, I think so. It sounds like that leads into your second essay a little bit too, which is religious liberty or religious license, legal schizophrenia, which I thought was a great, and the case against exemptions. So in the first essay, you're arguing about why you need this kind of imperative of intellectual freedom, which means defending religious freedom because people need to have the ability to discourse on this. They need to and also internally, so this is where you quote Milton, the Areopagitica, which is his defense of the freedom of press in 1644, I think it was. And so before the establishment of the First Amendment, right? It's some of the things that led up to it, I think. And so you're arguing about religious freedom, that we need to have that. There's an internal reason we need to have that, which is like...
But it's not just we need to have intellectual freedom.
Exactly.
Religious freedom is only an exercise of that.
It's one of the exercises.
There's nothing special about religion. Again, that's part of what I'm trying to stress here.
And then, I'm just trying to lay the framework for but the second one is, it almost feels like, it's like, okay, so yes, we do need this freedom.
Yeah.
Because you need to have intellectual freedom in general.
Yes.
And so religious shouldn't be, it's not special. It shouldn't be pro or con from the government's perspective. Yeah. But it also shouldn't be pro, which is the next step.
And
and it does seem like we have special favors for this.
We do, and it's amazing. And I wish I could find the page quickly. So, I won't even try to look for it here, but let's see. So, and this was an article that grew, you asked at the beginning, how did I get interested in free speech? And I spoke a little bit about some work I was doing with free speech for students and all. But this is an article that I actually was, the whole concept of religious exemptions is something I got interested in when I was toward the end of writing my book on judicial review, on how should judges interpret the law, what does the Constitution really mean. Okay, I was writing a book on that, has nothing to do with, it's not directly at all about particularly First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, any amendment. Okay, it's about judicial review. But, paying attention to things in the news about the law, just out of interest and out of connection with my book. And in the book, it's one of the books not here, but Judicial Review in an Objective Legal System. The reason why I want to say the title is the emphasis is on an objective legal system. Mm-hmm. I read about a law case by chance one day, in the New York Times, and it had to do with religious exemptions. I had never, if I had heard of them, it went right by me before. Religious exemptions. And then there was some similar kind of concept in another case. And because again, I'm thinking about the objectivity of a legal system. And one of the requirements is that it be fully consistently integrated. Mm-hmm. You can't have a legal system that's pointing in two opposite directions and giving the law.
That's the schizophrenia.
That's the schizophrenia, right? And I thought, well, I got to look into that when I'm done with the book, because I'm almost finished with the book. And then the more I researched this religious I discovered there's this big category. And different states have different laws about what they will exempt. But the basic idea is, on religious grounds, you don't have to obey the laws in the way everybody else does. That's the basic idea, putting it in very kind of rough and colloquial terms. But again, we have this law. It applies to everybody, but if you're religious, and there are, of course, certain conditions placed on how you show your religion. Oh, but if you're religious, you get a get-out-of-law-free card. What the hell is that about? Now, again, so I have a whole essay on these religious exemptions, and I cite, there's a long bullet list of, I think the classic case that most people are familiar with is something like when we have a military draft in place, as during the Vietnam War. Some people would claim conscientious objection on religious grounds. You can't put me into combat. I don't want to kill, or something like that. Okay. But, so I mean, I had long been familiar with that because I was alive during the Vietnam War. You can get out of certain kinds of standardized testing for your kids, standardized like intellectual testing for your kids in certain states on religious grounds. You can get out of certain vaccines. I think this has become more well known in recent years on religious grounds. If all the other kids have to get these vaccines, oh, but you claim religion X, you don't have to. But I mean, even at least equally ominously, there are daycare regulations. Like if you run a daycare facility, there are all sorts of, surprise, surprise, government regulations about safety precautions and so on, and who you can hire and so on. Oh, but there are exemptions. Again, in some states, the laws vary. In some states, on religious grounds, you don't have to comply with those things. Or certain of the employment requirements in general, not just in daycare. So there's a long list what is that about? So this article really goes into those. And I think one of the strengths of this article is it takes on in depth 3 or 4 of the strongest defenses of exemptions.
I was going to mention.
And it's not just religious fanatics who defend them. Like there are some very cogent, intelligent arguments to be made, all of which I think fail. And I think do a pretty good job of dismantling them. But I take on very seriously some really substantial, scholarly, deep, well thought through defenses of religious exemptions and show why they make utterly no sense. But it's this kind of, yes, we'll have this schizophrenic law. And one of the things I argue, well, a very simple, important thing I argue is government's job is to protect our rights. Mm-hmm. Government's role, their function, their whole reason for being is to protect individuals' rights. Your rights are no wider than mine because you believe in God. Sunday mornings, I go play golf, you go to church. That should make no difference to how the government treats us. Your rights are no wider or no narrower because of what you believe about God, about religion, about anything else. So the government should not be treating us differently by saying, oh, well, these people get a pass. Some of this came out during COVID. But if, during the period in which there were restrictions in many places on how many could congregate. Oh, okay, but if it's for a religious purpose, we'll give you an exception. Oh, does the disease become less contagious if, you're Jewish?
Mm-hmm.